But then all of a sudden you start seeing this, okay, now how do we handle this? We've got very, very cheap power, but it's intermittent, it's not predictable, and sometimes it only shows up certain times of the year, and so those times of the year can have very wonky pricing. And it was California. So I actually had like in a way my career has been like chasing around this dynamic, not intentionally, but California had the first real solar push. And they also had a lot of wind at the time. So there's an infamous term in power markets called, the duck curve. The duck curve is kind of this, the belly of the duck is when they have all this glut of solar, but then the peaks are the tail and the neck. So this concept of the duck curve, or like temporary oversupply of solar energy, of intermittent power, that started in California. And so California was the first time that we actually saw certain nodes or certain aggregate like zones go completely negative, not for that long, but during predictable and certain hours of the day.
With your background in power and then how you got into Bitcoin mining, like it's kind of open-ended, but how do you see the industries? It seems like you see them almost as like one because they're so intertwined, but how do you see this continuing to progress?
So I guess the first analogy is like, I view a data center as simply going up the value chain. So I view data centers as a refinery. So from a very basic standpoint, like, and this is oversimplified for your audience who has some energy knowledge, but like in many ways, natural gas is a byproduct and in some ways a refined product of oil. More of a byproduct, right? They go for the oil. The oil has its own refining chain, but as part of that process, whether it's production or whether the refining process, you often create a bunch of natural gas when you're really after the oil. And so that was kind of like the first step. And certainly, 100 years ago, there was no use for methane. There was no use for natural gas. They were just after the oil. And then even for the oil, they were mainly just after kerosene for lighting, right? Like before we got into gasoline. And then they did find a use for ethane and methane, which was power generation. So, and there's all these industrial uses for it as well. But then like a generator, a power generator, a gas plant, it is its own kind of refinery where you're taking gas as an input, and then you're making this more useful product out of it, this more valuable product of electricity. And electricity is more valuable because it's more versatile. Whereas, gas, you need to do something, on the chemical side, or you need to burn it for heat, and that's its utility. Whereas power, you can do almost infinite. We do everything with it now. You can use it in a hospital. You can use it for heat. You can use it for the next stage, which I would say is running a data center. And now you're taking this versatile form of power of energy, and you're refining it into information. And so it's just going up the value chain to me. And so I do have this commodity view of Bitcoin mining and compute in general, because I don't view GPU compute as that different. It's just a different kind of refinery, but you're taking something that's versatile power and you're making it more valuable. And you need equipment to do that. And you're kind of incinerating, the power ceases to be useful from a energy standpoint, but now you've turned it into something that has value. And whether that's a training model, whether that's inference for AI, or whether that's the SHA-256 algorithm, which helps secure the network, which generally create these hashes and then we throw them away after, but they still did this valuable process of helping secure the network, helping solve the block, and making all Bitcoin that came before and after it, more secure. And so that is a valuable thing. So that's part of my mental framework, is I just view mining as intrinsic, as tied to energy as power is tied to gas, right? It's just part of the same value chain, and it's a decision as you go up that value chain. The other way I kind of might look at it is, I kind of like an ecosystem view, like using like the traditional ecosystems as kind of this analogy, which I think is very powerful if you do it in business. And so when I ran my own little mining company, the 3 megawatts, with my co-founder, what we did is, we actually ended up deploying that in the Alberta oil and gas field. So we did flare gas mining. And we were using these older machines. So like I had this analogy of that, we were the recyclers, that in any in any kind of advanced ecosystem that, not everyone, you can't just have lions, right? You need lions, and you need gazelles, and you need this, you also need the kind of the bottom of the food web, something to recycle the waste. And so that's kind of how we viewed our very small niche in the system is like, we're going to be the people who buy the old miners, the old computers for essentially scrap metal prices, and find a use for them that where they're worth more than nothing. And so for us, that was, consuming flare gas, which was a spin on the idea of negative power pricing. It just came with a lot less red tape and bureaucracy, which is what led us there. So why I brought that up is that, Bitcoin miners, they exist in this ecosystem of energy. For a long time, they were kind of the bid of last resort, or they were the big bid. They would come in and value energy, especially in a bull market, quite highly, and they had the money to do these massive data centers or to turn an old aluminum plant, into a data center. And that was like the niche that they occupied, and they were basically the alpha, the alpha predator, the apex predator of the ecosystem. Now there's this really interesting dynamic where like that's not them. Like now the AI guys, the high performance, the hyperscalers compute, the HPC guys are coming in with much bigger budgets, much bigger appetite. And so the Bitcoin miners are actually finding themselves as like lower on the food chain as they were. But the smart ones are like okay with that, in my opinion, because they go, okay, now we basically have this role of taking a patch of land or taking an old aluminum smelter plant and retrofitting that into the data centers and creating what I call just energized shelf space. And now there's insane demand for energized shelf space that does kind of need to fit next to a fiber highway, or HPC has their own requirements. And so Bitcoin miners can then basically sell that at this big premium, and then they can go off and they can chase, they can do what they're doing, what they're really good at this point, which is finding these energy resources, building them up. But maybe they're going to find something that is more suited now to Bitcoin mining, something a little more remote, something away from the fiber, something, more bite-sized, like an aggregate of 10 sites instead of one big one. But I view that as an opportunity for Bitcoin miners, because maybe 10 years from now, the hyperscalers will be so hungry for power that that's what they have appetite for. Or maybe Bitcoin miners just need to find their own niche where they go, okay, we're still really good at upcycling power, at going for these stranded assets, but we can't compete with the hyperscalers for the easy access power. So Bitcoin miners need to actually get back to their roots, almost get scrappy and find sources of power, sources of energy that are harder for the hyperscalers to access or further away from the internet, from fiber. So long-winded answer, but like those are two analogies that I have. Is like, one is that all Bitcoin mining companies are energy companies, whether they realize it or not, and they're just refineries going up a value chain. And the other is like this kind of ecosystem view where there's a lot of different, things, at play. And you just gotta, are you a recycler? Are you the apex predator? Are you a hybrid where you're going into energy and you can convert your data center into one or the other? But that's a large part of how I look at it. And it's very dynamic, right? Especially with the AI boom that's kind of kicked off the past few years.
Dude, I loved that answer. That I was sitting here just thinking, man, this is an awesome podcast. Hearing you run through all that. Quick question: as you were talking and going through, you laid it out so well, and I think that we see things very similar in terms of how these overlap in terms of the energy sector, the mining industry. I'm curious, have you come across the work of Brandon Quittem as Bitcoin mining as the pioneer species?
No, but that I would just based on that very simple summary, I'd probably love it, because that idea that is probably even more articulate that I was getting at, right? Is they go in, they're the pioneers, they build all this stuff up, and then someone else can just come and scoop it all up. But if that's what you're good at, then just take the win, take the premium and do it again. So
yeah, I would love to riff on that with you right now. So for quick context, Brandon Quittem, he's an amazing philosophical thinker, but very articulate. He was part of Swan, helped Swan grow into the massive organization that it is today as head of growth. And he's also an advisor to SAS Mining. And he's been on the podcast before, and we've talked through when he was laying out Bitcoin as a pioneer species. And as you were laying out your own views on things, it's amazing because we had the conversation a number of years ago, and the thesis of it, and granted, it's been a while since I've visited the source material, but energy is the bedrock of a civilization. It allows you to, hospitals, any type of infrastructure that makes human life better is derived from energy. So that ties off of, exactly what you just said. And he was talking about how Bitcoin is a pioneer species. You have this beautiful economic incentive system and everything that makes Bitcoin amazing that is driving the incentive for miners to go out and capitalize and utilize and build up stranded power assets or bring more energy capacity to the forefront that makes human civilization possible. And exactly what you just laid out is, in a very interesting way, another view on that playing out in real time. And I love that you dove a little bit into your mining operation in terms of how you approached it with flare gas. And so that even going off of like that approach of, okay, how do we take this down the value chain? I mean, you're taking methane that is this wasted power, this wasted pollutant, really worse than carbon dioxide for the environment, and then converting that into Bitcoin, which is beautiful. I think that it's amazing that was the approach that you took with mining. I feel like there's so many ways we could dive into taking the conversation that I'm like curious to dive into, but I guess it's your first time hearing about the work of Brandon on talking about Bitcoin as a pioneer species. Like, if you were to kind of riff off of that, is there anything that comes to mind or any way that you see it that, I guess just open-ended, like what are your thoughts on that type of an approach that he was talking about?
Yeah, and I mean, no, it's fascinating, and we could probably spend I could probably spend days, just chatting about this idea, and my mind goes a few different places with this. Actually, oddly enough, where I'm going to start, I don't know have you seen the the overlay of Myers-Briggs personality types with Bitcoiners?
I have not. No, that sounds fascinating though.
I mean, it's an awesome chart that, like if we can pull it up or if you can edit it in.
Yeah. We'll edit it in.
I'd recommend it. And so it's this chart that shows basically like the normal population. So Myers-Briggs, there's like 4 letters. Basically there's 16 personality types that are the combination of these letters for anyone who's done it. It is a pseudoscience. Like I just, so to caveat everything I'm saying, this is just a model, right? To like help explain people. And so it's like very much a pseudoscience, but at the same time, they're basically just putting people into one of 16 buckets. And so the buckets aren't evenly distributed. Some of the buckets have maybe up to like 18 or 16% of the population, and some of them are like closer to like 1 or 2%. But and that's just like a sample. So they did like a broader sample on just the general population, and then a broader sample, and then Bitcoiners, specifically people who call themselves Bitcoiners, and then you see this it's inverse, right? And for anyone who's spent time in the Bitcoin community, this isn't surprising that the rarer personality types are completely outrepresented in the Bitcoin community. And then the normies, like the people, like the personality types that capture a lot more of the normal population in terms of percentage basis, tend not to be Bitcoiners. And as a Bitcoiner, this isn't surprising that because we're constantly dealing with the normies, or we know that we're not, we almost define ourselves on not being the quote unquote normies. But what's interesting is like the personality types are dominated by innovators and thinkers, and people more willing to reject the mainstream thinking or try something different. And so the reason I'm so not only do I 100% agree that Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin is kind of like this pioneer species, but it's not just it's because of the people who make it up, and that they do tend to be more innovative, experimental, more willing to try something that's never been done before, and not just take the conventional of like, oh well, we've never done it before, no one else does it this way. That doesn't stop a Bitcoiner, right? It's like we're on the frontier as it is, of course. And so the two areas in mining specifically where I see Bitcoin mining as being the pioneer species is one is immersion. So the idea of dunking your computer in oil as and then flushing the oil, moving the oil around instead of moving air around, that is crazy and super cool. And that basically, and now you're seeing the traditional data centers start to do that, but that was 100% pioneered in Bitcoin data centers. Like, we were the first crazy people to be dealing with this insane amount of heat, like the amount of energy density of a Bitcoin mining data center. It's unlike anything. It's even unlike the GPUs. So then the how do we get rid of this heat? How do we not cook the computers becomes like a bigger problem. And then there's 1,000 different ways that these scrappy little miners have attempted to solve it. One is this dielectric fluid that essentially this oil. A lot of people call it mineral oil, but it's a bunch of different things. But that's something that we're now seeing like traditional data centers do. But all the kinks, all the mistakes, all the literal fires, most of those have been Bitcoin mines. And then they proved out this technology, what works, what doesn't work, when this makes sense, when this doesn't make sense. Okay, it's twice the CapEx, but does it simplify operations? We were 100% the pioneers there. And now we're seeing it go mainstream. And I think we're always going to be doing that, right? Is like, trying stuff out in our little data centers that no hyperscaler would do initially, but once they see it work, that they'll do. Very related to this is upcycling heat. And you can upcycle heat, through these approaches, but the idea that Bitcoin mining isn't that basically 100% of the power that goes to a computer basically becomes waste heat.
Talk show.